Peace and love, brothers and sisters. You already know who it is. It's I, De Belmont from the illustrious Noble House of Belmont. And thank you for taking a look at the channel today with the video that we have, which we already know is part 2 of if you don't know who you are, how do you know where you're going? Now I may kind of messed up that title, but you understand what it is I'm trying to say. So today, for those of you who don't understand, the Berber calendar is the year 2974, which is equivalent to your 2024 Gregorian calendar. November 30th is the date, which is also the Sabbath for those of you who haven't been keeping up with the lunisolar calendar, which is equivalent to the Most High's calendar from the biblical stories, which was supposed to be returned at the end of an age, which we all know that we are pretty much are into right now. So today is a beautiful day, always a beautiful day, especially for those of you who are having the ability to hear my voice. Check out the Third Temple English Church of England homepage that you see I have pulled up right here. I'd like to give honors to our King Clifford Jefferson from the Royal House of Plantagenet, our Queen Lisa Jordan from the Royal House of Galveston, to our heirs, successors, trustees, members within the church, as well as the loyal subjects of the realm who are scattered amongst the four corners of the world. We know we have been gone for a very long time due to we didn't have proper representatives here to be able to teach those of us who needed to know this information the most, and that is those long lost heirs within the British American colonies that you now know as the United States of America. So I don't want to be too long-winded within this introduction. Once again, I have to give honors to our King, who has been doing a marvelous job in keeping up with the lessons to bring the consciousness to those of you who need to hear this information, especially during the day and time that we're living in. We as English heirs know we have perpetual allegiance. Our allegiance is tied to the English monarchy, which is not the same as the British monarchy or the United Kingdom monarchy. For those who don't understand that there is a true difference from the understanding that you have come to think that they are one and the same when they are not. In 1707, the Act of Union was an act of parliament by those constituents of Great Britain who merged the Parliament of England and the Parliament of Scotland into one, which made those English heirs as well as those Scottish heirs become now British subjects. So technically we would be considered what they would say real British subjects, but in essence we're actually English heirs and Scottish heirs. And those of us within the Third Temple English Church of England, we recognize ourselves as Anglo-Saxon Berbers, English heirs. And we're not negating the fact that we do have the blood from those other kingdoms within us. It's just right now we know in this day and time and age that we live in that England has the superior claim, especially when it comes down to bringing some form of salvation to the heirs who have been suffering and dealing with plight for far too long. So once again, we are here to bring this information for those who are ready to hear, to accept it. If you don't, you know what you need to do. Keep moving. We're not here to argue. We're not here to try to prove a point that the facts and the records are already proven, and we're just being the voice of those records and those who have passed away to allow you to be able to have the ability to exist here in this day and time. And if we don't do this work, you will no longer have a place to call home for you to be able to practice whatever it is you come to believe, to worship. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get it started with the lesson. I don't want to keep you too long. For those of you who are just now getting a chance to check the page, please like, share, subscribe, because unfortunately, you know, with how the algorithm is, the fact that we're not doing as many videos compared to a lot of counterparts out there, it's going to take some time for us to get through a lot of the content that's already being created. And this information is more of a niche because we're only going to be focusing on genealogy in regards to us as being English heirs and subjects of Great Britain. And we're talking about our history. We're talking about what's going on with us, not only today, but with also what happened to our predecessors going back to time immemorial and before. So we're not trying to, bring any confusion for those of you who come to believe and accept history or life the way that it is. That's based off of your perspective. If that's what makes you float, hey, more power to you. At the end of the day, we know who we are, and we come to do an obligation. And if you don't want to see what it is that we come to do, we keep it moving. So let's go ahead and go into the Third Temple English Church of England's website. For those of you who want to help us in this intellectual movement, please like, share, subscribe once again. Also donate to the cause. We have Cash App, $ English Church up there, which is easier for us to do donations right now at this moment. We did have a bank account for the church, but with technical issues with Bank of America, we just decided to kind of utilize what we have that's a little bit easier for people to use today. We have Venmo as well, and then we have other forms of abilities to be able to take in donations. So you can just email us if you would like to go ahead and get that information, or you can leave a comment down at the bottom of the video. And also too, make sure anyone you know who this information may be able to help, bring enlightenment within their understanding and realm of thought. We're literally looking for those who can comprehend what it is that we're saying, who can read the directions, who can follow along, who can see what the script is, who don't have any type of animosity against what it is they're going to come to learn. Because once you come to see who you are, everything is not going to be what you thought it was. It's about what you decide to do with the information that you have inherited, and how you're going to handle it moving thus forward. So we're not perfect people, we're good people. And the goal is to reach which we call perfection. And we can do this together, or we can do it by ourselves. It doesn't, it doesn't matter to us. At the end of the day, this job and this work is going to get done. So let's go ahead and move forward with the lesson. All right, so the web address is thirdtempleenglishchurch.com. Our Savior, our Cristo, King Edgar the Peaceful, from the Royal House of Wessex. For those of you who don't know about King Edgar the Peaceful, he is known as the Jesus Christ for the English people, or the Anglo-Saxon Berbers, going back to the year 927, which was the kingdom was started, but King Edgar came into power around the year 950, right after King Ethelstan, which was his uncle. All right, and what King Edgar the Peaceful brought was the Benedictine movement in a more profound way in regards to establishing the English intellectual movement, which we're, as you can see, we're just the rebirth of in this day and age. And what King Edgar was doing, he was bringing peace amongst the empire based off of intelligence, and the Benedictine movement was monks who were replacing the secular clergy, and like I said, brought more of a uniform way of how we here in the Kingdom of England were supposed to worship and do things underneath what King Edgar instituted. And like he said, that we had to be underneath the same accord, like the biblical story tells us, no house divided can stand. Same way with King Edgar, based off of the English Benedictine movement, we're required to be of one mind, and that's the reason why the king is the head. The king sets the tone and the body follows. So we have to give honor to our Christ, because without him, there would be no us today, literally. All right. Like it says, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. Welcome to the Third Temple English Church of England. We as English heirs are ordained by blood. So this is a bloodline thing. And many of you have the blood. You just have to remember and then accept who you are. All right, so we as English heirs are ordained by blood to bring the truth to a world that's been living in darkness. As we come forth with the law and history of our forefathers, foremothers, instituted since time immemorial, written in the English Magna Carta 1215 and codified in the Statutes of Westminster 1275. Oops, sorry, couldn't see that. And this, once again, is our foundation or our mission, purpose, or one of the purpose, but based off our blood, we're obligated and ordained. It's a divine birthright to do this work, and we have to do it for our salvation, not just for ourselves, but for posterity and for those of you who are also heirs and successors of this beautiful, magnanimous kingdom that you know nothing about because it had been brought out of your mindset or out of your conscience by those who have inferious motive that's not conducive for our longevity and livelihood. And they're screaming nefarious. Bad. And then here's the Magna Carta, which is called the Great Charter, or we can call it the English Magna Carta. And for those of you who've been paying attention to the King's Lesson, it shows you that the Magna Carta, which we know could be tied to the Witten, and the Witten goes back to Berbers, or which is known as the Wise Men, the Great Council, the King's Council, similar to what they call the Curia Regis. It's the same thing. But in this case, we're going to speak in regards to us as English people who recognize the Great Charter coming back down from Parliament. Because the King did this with Parliament and the barons. Alright, so it says, the preamble, John, by the grace of God, King of England, Lord of Ireland, Duke of Normandy and Aquitaine, and Count of Anjou, to the Archbishop, bishops, abbots, earls, barons, justiciaries, foresters, sheriffs, stewards, servants, and to all his bailiffs, liege subjects, greetings. It says, know that having regard to God and for the salvation of our soul and those of all our ancestors and heirs, and unto the honor of God and the advancement of his holy church, and for the rectifying of our realm, we have granted as underwritten by advice of our venerable fathers, Stephen, Archbishop of Canterbury, Primate of all England and Cardinal of the Holy Roman Church, Henry, Archbishop of Dublin, William of London, Peter of Winchester, Jocelyn of Bath and Glastonbury, Hugh of Lincoln, Walter of Worcester, William of Coventry, Benedict of Rochester, Bishops of Master Pandulf, Subdeacon and a member of the household of our Lord the Pope, of Brother Amaric, Master of Knights of the Temple of England, and the illustrious men William Marshall, Earl of Pembroke, William Earl of Salisbury, William Earl of Warren, William Earl of Arundel, Alan Galloway, Constable of Scotland, Worrell Fitzgerald, Peter Fitzherbert, Hubert de Burgh, Seneschal of Poitou, Hugh de Neuville, Matthew Fitzherbert, Thomas Bassett, Alan Bassett, Philip de Augmeney, Robert of Ropesby, John Marshall, John Fitzhugh, and others, our liege men. Clause 1, and this is the most important clause for those of us English heirs. Clause 1 is also, too, I always say, right after the preamble, and the constitutions are also, too, one of the most important articles for you to read and understand, because the most important things people say first, and then everything else normally comes in a sequential order. So it says, Clause 1, in the first place we have granted to God, and by this our present charter confirmed for us, and our heirs forever, that the English church shall be free, and shall have her rights entire, and her liberties inviolate. And we will that it be thus observed, which is apparent from this, that the freedom of elections, which is reckoned most important and very essential to the English church, we, of our pure unconstrained will, did grant, and did by our charter confirm, and did obtain the ratification of the same for our Lord, Pope Innocent III, before the quarrel rose between us and our barons. And this we will observe, and our will is that it is observed in good faith by our heirs forever, we have also granted to all free men of our kingdom, for us and our heirs forever, all the underwritten liberties to be had and held by them and their heirs, of us and our heirs forever. Magna Carta 1215. And we know that it was redone again in 1217, and then it was incorporated into the Statute of Westminster in 1275. So yes, so the Magna Carta itself is a lawful document, and it was incorporated into the so-called colonies that you call the British American colonies, which the United States does recognize, and it is an enforceable document today, for those of you who are not familiar with that. All right, and then you can check out the rest of the information we have on here on the Third Temple English Church page. For those of you who are members, please share this amongst those who need to see this information, especially if you know they themselves are descendants from the King of England, Great Britain, unconsciously claiming to be Negro, black, colored, or whatever other misnomer. It doesn't matter. Ethnicity, it didn't matter underneath the kingdom. All of you prior to 1776 were subjects of the kingdom of the king. Actually, even prior to 1783, all of you were still subjects of the King of Great Britain. And then those of us who were made subjects via 1707 Acts of Union, we still owe our perpetual allegiance to our English king or our English crown. And then there's the Cash App again for those who would like to donate to the church. And if you have any questions, comments, or other ways that you would like to help contribute to our intellectual movement, please send a message on the contact page. So therefore, someone can get it back to you as soon as possible with your requests. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the rest of this lesson. Okay, so I remember where we left off at last time. We were speaking in regards to the black loyalists. We also went through my family's genealogy, showing you the connection from the Belmonts, Belmonts, from my family origins starting from me, tracing it back to my mother because I don't have my paternal side to use. So many of you who don't have your paternal side, use your maternal. If you don't know your maternal, use your paternal. Either way around, utilize what you have and trace it all the way back as far as you can. And then what I've showed from there, the connection as us being Berbers because of the 1740 South Carolina Negro Act, and then my family being Britain. And for those, and I didn't actually clarify Britain and how he got his name, but based off of the oral stories that I was told from my Aunt Carrie, Britain received his name from where the territory he came from. And in this case, as we can see, the territory Britain is what? England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland. So he came from that territory, as you saw from my family's surname, Beaumont, and Belmont. Belmont, because it's like a tongue twister. It goes back to Great Britain and France. So there's a connection. So the family, we really never lost our identity. We just didn't really have it expounded upon after 1870 because of my great-great-grandfather was placed, because of those who knew about the Old Dominion or the Old World, unfortunately were placed into what we call the sane asylums because they knew too much and it was going against the new occupiers' narrative. Many of you can go look this stuff up. It's facts. But anywho, so after that, I showed you that the Berbers from the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica were also known as the Celts, the Gauls, the Picts, the Iberians, the Libyans. They were all the same people, no matter what territory they were known as. Based off of the megalithic monuments that were there or erected, they all were similar, which showed that they ethnically were the same people, and in this case, we're calling them, or based off the Encyclopedia Britannica, they're Berbers. So, yes, I am a Berber, and many of you are too, especially if you have been known as Negro, Black, Color, African American, etc. Now, based off of that information, tied it over here to this Black loyalist. Now, I'm glad that the King did a lesson the other day, and the brother had brought up, said something regarding him being a British loyalist. And there's a difference because we're explaining to you that those who are named British subjects were actually English subjects and Scottish subjects, but your surname was going to determine if you were underneath the Kingdom of England or underneath the Kingdom of Scotland. And when during this time, a lot of us had to change our last names and utilize a variation of it. So therefore, it showed that the allegiance was underneath the ruling monarchy and not those who were pretty much being subjugated and put out of a position of so-called power. And in this case, we're talking about the English. Even though everybody utilizing all the rights and powers and prerogatives of the English, you couldn't claim to be so-called English. Why? Because there was no one who can actually truly be the English king in the picture. That's the reason why they were known as the British monarchs. But don't want to go too far in that rant. Let's go ahead and focus on the lesson. So, Black loyalists. Black loyalists. All right, so I'm going to just I'm going to be hitting skipping because I don't want to stand too far into this. I'm just trying to wrap up from part one, and hopefully, me wrapping up from part one, you would get an understanding of what it is that those who were made subjects of Great Britain and the reason why they became Black loyalists. All right. So it says, Black loyalists were people of African descent. We know African is code word for Berber. So people of Berber descent who sided with loyalists during the American Revolutionary War. In particular, the term referred to the men enslaved by the Patriots. The Patriots are known as the colonists, who served on the loyalist side because of the Crown's guarantee of freedom. Some 3,000 Black loyalists were evacuated from New York to Nova Scotia. They were eventually listed in the Book of Negroes as the British gave them certificates of freedom and arranged for their transportation. The Crown gave them land grants and supplies to help them resettle in Nova Scotia. Some of the European loyalists immigrated to Nova Scotia, brought their enslaved servants with them, making for an uneasy society. One historian has argued that those enslaved people should not be regarded as loyalists as they had no choice in their fates. Other Black loyalists were evacuated to London or the Caribbean islands. All right. This part, the rest of that, you can read on your own. This is what I wanted to get down to. I'm going to talk about the background real quick. It says legal statutes had never authorized slavery in England. Villeinage, a form of semi-serfdom, was legally recognized, but long obsolete. In 1772, an enslaved person threatened with being taken out of England and returned to the Caribbean challenged the authority of his enslaver in the case of Somerset v. Stewart. Now, in this case itself was what technically they said set off the American Revolutionary War, because a lot of those enslavers no longer had power over their so-called slaves when it come down to them transporting them in a territory what we call England and going outside the kingdom. And now once they came into the Kingdom of England, they were no longer considered slaves, and the enslavers weren't on that. So that's what pretty much helped pop off the so-called American Revolutionary War. It says the Chief Justice Lord Mansfield ruled that slavery had no standing under common law, and enslavers therefore were not permitted to transport enslaved people outside of England and the Wales against their will. You see, many observers took it to mean that slavery was ended in England. Let me make sure I see all of this on there, because look. Okay. Okay, lower courts often interpreted the ruling that the status of slavery did not exist in England and Wales, but Mansfield ruled more narrowly. The decision did not apply to the North American Caribbean colonies, where local legislators had passed laws to institutionalize slavery. So they're telling you that the British American colonies institutionalized slavery. This was not on the books. But in England, it was not. Many cases were presented to the English courts for the emancipation of enslaved people residing in England, and numerous American runaways hoped to reach England where they expected to gain freedom. Enslaved Americans began to believe that King George III was for them, and against their enslavers as tensions increased before the American Revolution. Colonial slavers feared the British-inspired slave rebellion, and Lord Dunmore wrote to Lord Dartmouth in early 1775 of his intention to take advantage of the situation. Pause. So as you can see, we're up and all the way up to the beginning of the American Revolution, that those who were considered slaves were already at the point that they knew they were going to be pretty much pledging their allegiance moving forward with the British monarch because they were guaranteed freedom. Now, and everybody who was actually so-called considered a slave technically was not a slave. You know, you had a lot of indentured servants, and then on top of that, you had people who were actually still heirs from the kingdom who were placed in bondage, who wanted to still maintain their allegiance to the crown, and as long as they felt that they were going to fight for the so-called British crown, as you can see in this case, they were going to be given their freedom. And I know many folks think that so-called slaves were given their enslaver surnames, and that's actually false. A lot of them had their surnames, and a lot of them were actually, like I said, slaves to begin with. They were just indentured servants underneath occupation. All right, let's continue. Then you can read Dunmore's proclamation yourself. It's pretty good. But that's where I wanted to get to. Write down the post-war treatment, because this lesson is about, do you know who you are? You know, and for you to know where you're going, you need to know who you are. Well, we already know what happened with the war. We know that these are all subjects of the kingdom of Great Britain, just based off of the laws that was instituted within the colony. They're all royal colonies, so everyone who was inside the so-called colony themselves, technically by default, was a subject of the king. Period. It was his colonies, so everyone who was there was accounted for technically underneath his prerogative. All right, the post-war treatment. I want you to be able to all see this, so let me fix it because it's not long. All of it to be seen. Hopefully, for those of you who are watching so far, please like, share, subscribe. All right. So just also too, please pull this up on your side, because I know it's going to be hard sometimes to see some of these words. Just by how it's not lining up for me all the way. So yeah, so that way you can read the words for yourself to complete the sentence. All right, so post-war treatment. It says, when peace negotiations began after the siege of Yorktown, a primary issue of debate was the fate of black British soldiers. Loyalists who remained in the United States, now pay attention, it says loyalists who remained in the United States wanted black soldiers returned so their chances of receiving reparations for the damaged property would be increased. But British military leaders fully intended to keep the promise of freedom made to black soldiers despite the anger of the Americans. Pause. So Great Britain wanted to maintain their promise. Hey, we say we're going to go ahead and free you. We're going to go ahead and free you. The Americans, on the other hand, like, nah, we want to keep our property. Their property before the war. Excuse me. Their property after the war. Go give me something to drink. Said your property after the war. So it says, in the chaos as the British evacuated loyalist refugees, mainly from New York and Charleston, that's Charleston, South Carolina, American enslavers attempted to enslave and re-enslave many people. So, pause. Now, like they telling you, folks in North New York and Charleston, and I'm sure in the other parts of the other colonies, but they were re-enslaving them. So those who were considered subjects of Great Britain were being re-enslaved in American colonies after the war. This is now where we get where we can clearly call these people prisoners of war. And if this is the case, and if you are a descendant of one of these people, that make you a descendant of prisoners of war. But descendants of what nation? As you can see, not everyone, like I told you before, just because they were slaves didn't mean that they were from a different territory. A lot of the folks who were enslaved actually were enslaved in their own home, on land, on territory. In this case, we're speaking about the kingdom. A lot of the British subjects who were enslaved were actually English heirs or Scottish heirs, because slavery during this time, it didn't care where you come from. It was really about your skin complexion. All right. So it says, American enslavers attempted to enslave and re-enslave many people. Some will kidnap any black person. You hear this? Anyone who's considered dark-skinned or quote-unquote black, they were enslaved. And you could have been freed, because we already know there was a lot of free people of so-called color, or free black person, or free Negroes. It was a lot of us already who were free and was never slaves, even during the time of the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. Because we already know a lot of the enslavers were actually originally melanated people, or quote unquote what we call black people. But black and white were nothing more than legal fictions, part of a caste system, a status. All right. So with that being said, it says some will kidnap any black person, including those born free before the war, and enslave them. The U.S. Congress, like I said, those who were born free before the war, which they call freeborn. All right. The U.S. Congress ordered George Washington to retrieve any American property, including enslaved people, from the British as stipulated by the Treaty of Paris of 1783. Pause. So those of you who are considered subjects of Great Britain, based off of the orders from the United States Congress, they ordered George Washington to retrieve American property, aka those of you who they consider chattel wards or slaves, who are technically subjects of Great Britain, or English heirs, or Scottish heirs, or Irish heirs, or heirs from France, or whatever. But only way for them to know will be based off of your genealogy. How do you do genealogy? It'll be traced based off of your family surname, tracing your family surname origins all the way back to the territory that they come from. All right, and in this case, we already told you who we are. Since Lieutenant General Guy Carleton intended to honor the promise of freedom, the British proposed a compromise that would compensate enslavers and provide certificates of freedom and the right to be evacuated to one of the British colonies to any black person who could prove his service or status. You hear this? So they said you had to prove your service or your status. And based off of that was going to determine if they were going to evacuate you to a territory that was free from you being placed in bondage. Now, to me, this sounds similar to like a members only type of ordeal. You had to show proof that you was a member, and you can show proof that you was a member, you will not be admitted. You will be denied access. It's the same thing that we're telling you even for the church. Like, you have to remember. To remember is to gain the conscience of the king, what they call the king's conscience. In this case, the memory of the Kingdom of England. You have to understand that. You have to understand the history, our custom, our tradition, our religion, our laws, our etiquette, our mannerisms, our value systems, etc. You have to know this for you to be this. or to be that, or to be them, which is your true self. If you don't know this, then those who have took a position of power to oversee you as your overseers, they're going to continue to keep utilize you for whatever benefit they feel fit. And in this case, they're going to continue to keep having you operate and work for these corporations out here as chattel property, who they're just leasing out until the day you decide to croak over. All right. So it says the British transported more than 3,000 black loyalists to Nova Scotia, the greatest number of people of African, aka Berber descent, to arrive there at any one time. One of their settlements, Birchtown, Nova Scotia, was the largest free African community in North America for the first few years of its existence. Black loyalists found the northern climate and frontier conditions in Nova Scotia difficult, of course, too damn cold, and were subject to discrimination by other loyalist settlers, many of them enslavers. In July 1784, black loyalists in Shelburne were targeted in the Shelburne riots, the first recorded race riots in Canadian history. Crown officials granted lesser quality lands to the black loyalists, which were more rocky and less fertile than those given to the white loyalists. In 1792, the British government offered black loyalists a chance to resettle in a new colony in Sierra Leone. The Sierra Leone Company was established to manage its development. Half of the black loyalists in Nova Scotia, nearly 1,200, departed the country and moved permanently to Sierra Leone. They set up a community of Freetown. Pause. So as you're going to see, subjects of Great Britain, aka English heirs, Scottish heirs, were sent over to Sierra Leone, Africa, and they established the Sierra Leone Company. So they established a government over there. And I'm quite sure they still have proof of this information today. So when folks want to know or say those who are from West Africa is our so-called descendants or who we come from, in a way they're right. But they're not completing the sentence, because if they knew the history, they would know that a lot of those people who were sent to West Africa were actually those who come from the Kingdom of England, Great Britain, or the territory we call America first. That's right. They were over here in America or in the Kingdom of Great Britain before being shipped over to the territory that we call West Africa. All right. And it says, in 1793, the British transported another 3,000 blacks to Florida, Nova Scotia, and England as free men and women. Their names were recorded in the Book of Negroes by Sir Carleton. Approximately 300 free black people in Savannah refused to evacuate at the end of the war. That's Savannah, Georgia. And they're telling you, so these so-called free black people, and we're speaking about black loyalists, so these people were actually subjects of Great Britain or British subjects. And once again, these British subjects were who? Scottish and English heirs. You know who they are based off of tracing the origin of their family surname. All right. Fearing that they will be re-enslaved once they arrived in the West Indies, they established an independent colony in swamps near Savannah River. Let's see what Savannah River is. Savannah River is a major river in the southeastern United States, forming most of the border between South Carolina and Georgia. All right, so they're telling you that a lot of those free people who are melanated, who are technically British subjects, have resettled in the territories that we call South Carolina and Georgia. All right. Most of them were discovered and re-enslaved. And so they're telling you most of them were re-enslaved. So they're telling you a lot of the English or British subjects were re-enslaved. So these prisoners of war were now being re-enslaved, as Southern planters ignored the fact that the British had freed them during the war. So as you see that a lot of us were already freed because of the war, because of the side that we chose to fight for. And then those of you who were still actually free people, who were subjects, who were actually placed in bondage because of, like we read earlier, it said that if you were black, they didn't care. They were going to enslave you. Even if you were so-called free prior to the ending of the war, prior to the beginning of the war, they was going to enslave you. And that's what they did. I read that already. When the British ceded the colonies of East Florida and West Florida back to Spain, per the terms of the Treaty of Paris, hundreds of free black people who had been transported there from the South were left behind as British forces pulled out of the region. All right, so as I was telling you, a lot of the descendants, the free people, subjects of Great Britain, were left here when Great Britain left, or when the British monarch left here. They left a lot of the heirs here. A lot of the subjects were stuck, were placed in bondage. Now with this information that's coming to light, you can all hopefully start seeing that, hold on, you are children of prisoners of war. We're the descendants of prisoners of war. And no one ever came to bring us this information. No one came to our aid or rescue, until now. The king, the true king, King Clifford Jefferson, which he's doing right now in the court, which is the reason why you as heirs have to remember who you are and know that we have perpetual allegiance. And our allegiance is not only to our king and queen, but to their heirs forever. No matter how long time it went by, our allegiance is perpetual. And we're now in court fighting to save us. So therefore, we don't get lost and written out of history. Because as you can see what's going on right now, our home, what we call the kingdom, that's now known as the United States, which is nothing more than a corporation. So we don't want to identify as the United States. We are the English people, and since we have been here, going back since time immemorial and before, so our customs, our culture have always been pretty much, especially as Berbers, have always been, in a sense, having to fight for our salvation, our freedom, our liberty, for us to have some form of continuity. We always had to fight adversity from foreign invasions. So none of this is new. The difference is today is now we have the ability to read. We have the ability to write. We have the ability to utilize the laws at our disposal for us to resurrect ourselves so we have some foundation to stand on. But only you can do this. You have to use your voice. And if you choose not to use your voice as the living, you're going to still be considered part of the dead. That's why we're coming to bring these lessons the way that we are. That's the reason why we sound the way that we sound, as in a sense of urgency. Because if we didn't sound as this was urgent, you will take it lightly. We're not here to be a spectacle. Many people would think that what we're talking is crazy. But look at your community. Look at the world that you have come to claim and call home. It's a disaster. This is horrible. Our ancestors did not expect our homeland, our towns, to be turned into a wasteland. Filthy. The air is filthy. The food is filthy. The water is filthy. The people, their mindset is filthy. We cannot continue to exist as a species the way that folks are actually conducting themselves out here. So we need to have representatives of good, of benevolence to come out here to not only speak for the humans, but to speak for the animals and to speak for the Mother Nature herself, because she don't have a human voice to cry out. So those of us who are literally suffering the pains and the ills and the woes of this world, we have to be her voice. And that's as angels, which we're here to do now. That's the reason why you see us here on these platforms speaking the way that we're speaking. Not just to be hearing ourselves, but to actually to call out as a cry for help. We are in a state of emergency, whether you understand that or see it or not. We are in a state of emergency. Our back is literally against the wall. So if you can't help assist us, then we need you to move to the side and allow those who want to help us come and help us. Otherwise, you're wasting time and precious resources. So let's continue. So once again, heirs, lost descendants, you have been made prisoners of war by your enslavers, and their enslavers have now got you in a so-called cushiony, comfortable position where you don't even care to be who you truly are. And the fact that you don't know this means you are going to suffer the same consequences as your predecessors who were trying to keep these fiascos and heinous activities from happening to you. So, last part, it says the descendants. Many descendants of black loyalists have been able to trace their ancestry by using General Carleton's Book of Negroes. The number of these descendants is unknown. So they know that it's a lot of descendants out here. It's just they can't really give a number because we breed and populate so fast that they can't really give a good number. But when I'm explaining to you, if you do your genealogy, you will see that the kingdom is still here. We never really bred and mixed with any other so-called people. We actually been an isolated group for over the last 400 years. So if that's the case, then that means we have a higher concentration of the blood of those who we come from compared to those who claim to be our predecessors, when we know they're nothing more than foreigners, which they call denizens. All right, let's continue. In Nova Scotia, it says between 1776 and 1785, around 3,500 blacks, we know the numbers can be more, were transported to Nova Scotia from the United States. Part of a more extensive migration of about 34,000 loyalists, refugees, this massive influx of people increased the population of almost 60%, and led to the establishment in New Brunswick as a colony in 1784. Most of the free blacks settled at Birchtown, the most prominent black township in North America at the time, next to the town of Shelbourne, settled by whites. There are also several black loyalists buried in unmarked graves in the old burying ground, Halifax, Nova Scotia. All right, so I don't want to read too much about Nova Scotia or Canada because most of the audience who this information I'm going to be talking to is going to be in the territory we call the United States. So this info is important, but we're going to go to more of the United States territory, if they even have it on here. As you can see, we have it going down to Sierra Leone. Let's see. Okay, so as you can see, they don't even talk about the United States. That's something you need to think about, as we already told you that they enslaved a lot of the free people and those who were subjects of Great Britain and placed them back in bondage. And yet, as they were considered the descendants of black loyalists, that information should have been a little bit more expounded upon, especially talking about the descendants. And yet you don't see the United States information on here. So that's something that for those of you who are in the territories need to do your own research and ask yourself those questions. Why isn't the United States talking about those descendants of Great Britain who were so-called considered the descendants of the black loyalists here within the so-called British American colonies prior to them being changed over to the United States of America or to so-called several states? Why does no one speak about that? Why don't your so-called black leaders talk about that? Why is this something that's just now starting to come up into the mindset of the people after all of these years? No one is talking about that until now. Now that the Third Temple English Church has returned, now people are asking those questions. And let's look at the motto. Their motto was, "The heart of your knowledge is in your roots." Let me see if that can pop up. Nope. I'll make it smaller. Okay, there you go. So you see, it says, "The heart of your knowledge is in your roots." So you need to know your roots to know who you are, for you to be able to grasp upon this information in a more dignified fashion. When you do your genealogy, it's easier to accept this info. Until then, it's going to be hard for you to truly digest it. You know, it's going to be bitter for a lot of you because many of you decided to accept statuses and identities that's not truly who you are, especially when you come to the genealogy aspect. And you can't say you can't find yourself, because if I was able to find myself, I know you can find yourself. You know, the problem is many of you are not going to want to be who you are because you probably didn't like the position or the status or the role that your predecessors were. You know, we now into this time frame where everybody want to be their own king or own queen or their own boss, but that's not how a kingdom works. That's not how any society works. Like, everybody can't be the head. Everybody can't be the main man. Everybody can't be the main woman. You know, you can only be what you're capable of based off of your understanding. No one said you couldn't graduate into higher positions, but those positions are going to be given or going to be available to you once you show yourself capable of actually holding those positions. You know, just because you want it doesn't mean you're going to be given that. You have to have the ability to accept accountability of your actions of holding that position of trust, or with any other so-called public office. You have to be able to show that you have the credentials. You have to be able to show that you have the wherewithal, the discipline, the structure. All of that comes with time, and it's not something that is going to come overnight. You have to already be initiated into that life prior to this information. Like, how did you do in school? How do you work together with others? All of these mechanisms are going to be part of the judging modality regarding, like I said, what you're going to do based off of who you are. You know, so with that being said, this is the ending of part 2 of the lesson of you need to know who you are to know where you're going. And as you can see from the ending of the Black Loyalists, it showed you that after the War of 1783, the Treaty of Paris, they re-enslaved so-called subjects of Great Britain. Those of you who were labeled as Negro, Black, Color, African American, etc., even if you were free, you were re-enslaved after 1783. And we already know this is the case because we can prove it via the Dred Scott versus Sanford. And if Dred Scott knew that he was a subject of Great Britain prior to him being placed in bondage, he would have been able to have freed himself. But he didn't have the conscience, i.e. he didn't have the memory. He didn't know who he was. That's the reason why in 1740 they passed the Anti-Literacy Act, which was made it punishable for any so-called slave to learn how to read or write. So if the Anti-Literacy Act was passed in 1740 and it was around all of it at least up to 1865, that means after 1783, all of those who were placed in bondage, you would have lost your memory regarding knowing who you were. And based off of I'm explaining to you my great-great-grandfather Britain, who was born in 1870, who was born 5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation in the territory that we call South Carolina, which we know was underneath the 1740 South Carolina Negro Act. And his name was Britain, which we know goes back to the territory of England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland. He knew who he was, but they couldn't allow that to happen. That's the reason why, as we got older, when I heard the term or the name Britain, it didn't register as a so-called melanated man having that until I did my own research and started realizing that what I thought or what we were taught was actually false, or the whole story wasn't explained. And that's why we had to, as heirs, once you know who you are, you have to do the great work to remember, because no one else can tell you your history besides you. And if you don't know who you are, they don't know who you are. And at the end of the day, it's not their obligation or duty. It is yours. And unfortunately, those who we come from did a disservice to us. Whether they know it or not, it's cool. It is what it is. We live in a time now where we can actually right these wrongs. So it's really up to what you do. No longer can we point the blame game. We're actually in a better position than they who we come from was, because they couldn't do this work as swiftly as we can in a clear, clean, and concise way, as directly as we can today. You know, so once again, have to give honors to our king, for doing a marvelous job. Have to give honors to our queen, to the loyal heirs, to the brothers and sisters within the church. Those of you who have been watching the channel, to my family, my loved ones, those who have to sacrifice a lot of time away from to do this great work. Trust me, none of this has been done in vain, but it has to get done. It's a necessity. And if it don't be done, then the world that we know it, we will probably no longer have the ability to exist in it. So with that being said, please like, share, subscribe to the channel. Donate. We need donations, brothers and sisters. We need your help. Like we said, we're not getting the assistance from those who took over our estate because they want to maintain it. But if they see that the heirs are coming together the way that we're supposed to, as like a family, loved ones, those who are really truly ready to inherit what our predecessors put so much work, blood, sweat, and tears into, then we'll be able to start making some headway, because this is an international ordeal. This is not something that's so localized to the point that only a few people are talking about it. No, this is an international matter. And so we need you to help, because you are part of this. If you don't want to be part of it, then that we consider you part of the blame of why we're in this plight to begin with, and whatever is made or set for you, you're going to receive it, no matter how it's going to be given to you. So that's all based off of how that God chooses to do so, or how the ancestors decide to work it out. That's up to them. But in the meantime, our obligation is to come and set an example to show you that this work can be done, and it will be done. And as you still having the opportunity as first fruits, this is the way for you to do it, because once we get that green light and we feel it, it's coming very soon. To get through those doors is going to be a lot harder, which we're going to be utilizing strict scrutiny when it comes down to seeing who you are coming within the kingdom. So check us out. Peace.